What's going on, everyone, and welcome to Numbers Therapy. So a bit of background. We created Numbers Therapy originally to talk through the macro and bring on and showcase our experts in Metaverse HQ. And more specifically, so everyone can understand how all the big pieces fit together to make better decisions with NFTs and other investments using a balanced perspective, to learn about or from some of our people in the community, and to learn about different areas and opportunities out there, including different ways of thinking. More on Metaverse HQ, which we call MVHQ. MVHQ is the top Web3 trading and networking community, and we showcase traders, analysts, builders, and a variety of other rising experts in the space.
Let's get started, everyone. Sometimes we don't design it this way, sometimes we do. Welcome to Numbers Therapy episode 44, which is fitting for our guest today. Episode titled Currency Currently Meets Early Urgency. It's not a coincidence. We tried to have a little bit of fun with that. Purpose of Numbers Therapy, as you know, is to talk through the macro, operational, financial, technical, trading-based, other dimensions of Web3, putting the pieces together, help everyone understand the latest picture, and continue to elevate while hearing some awesome backstories and having some good laughs along the way. Everyone who's live, please feel free to ask questions, whether it's an intro question or a more advanced question. We'll make sure we capture it. I'm sure somebody else has a pretty similar question as well, so don't be shy. Lastly, Numbers Therapy, as we know, is rated NFA, as in none of what you hear in here is financial advice. So, and on to today's guest and episode. Up usually happens by parlaying $100 into a 10x and then upward from there. Those familiar with the famous Craigslist trade up, teenager who once traded up his old iPhone, eventually up to a Porsche. Today's guest has his own interesting flavor, but the foundation, much of his story comes from creative services, specifically rap, creative approach to break into the NFT space, and now finds himself with a very distinct position on how he approaches projects and trading, mobilizing his time, mental health, and his foreseeable future as well. His more introspective, patient view has led him to thinking through appropriate royalty structures, as well as dissecting adoption curves and risk reward. More intimately familiar, he's our favorite MC. Very happy to have him as a friend and colleague. Please, everyone, welcome Rossboss to the stage. Everyone, Ross, how you doing today?
Good, man, and thank you for the intro. That was sick.
It should be rhyming, but we don't want to. I don't want to embarrass myself and ruin the show for everybody, so we'll just leave that to you instead, which I think we'll get to at some point. But let's start in the first and obvious place that I think everyone wants to hear about, which is people who are familiar with you, of course, know about your rap and your hip hop side of things. Where did that come from? Writing, dropping bars. Where did that come into your life?
Okay, so I have two answers for you. It all started in middle school, but my best friend at the time was really, really into Kanye, and I got really, really into Kanye, and that's controversial now as I am a Jewish man. Shout out to my brethren Seinfeld and any other Jews in the MVHQ community. But controversial statement. But back then, absolutely loved Kanye. And I was just going through a lot of stuff at home. And I found hip hop and rap. And I was just like blown away by how much you could say, right? Like there's so many pop songs out there where they're just like, we're going to go out and have a fun night and a fun weekend. And I love you. And hip hop is the opposite of just like you're telling stories and you're like getting to know someone over song. So it became very cathartic for me. That's part one. The second part is there was a kid in middle school, Justin. He was the popular kid. And I remember at lunch, he was always freestyling. And everyone was like, oh my gosh, he can rhyme the word boot with shoot. And I was like, what the heck? Screw you, Justin. Like, I'm going to learn how to freestyle. I'm going to rap. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. So just practice rapping, got into it. And back then, like when you're a kid, you have so much brain plasticity. You can just like learn all this stuff. So I was just sitting in rooms, writing as often as I could, just like staying at home, writing rap after rap after rap. And they all sucked. Like you have to start somewhere. And it was really not even authentic to my life. I was just like emulating what I heard. But yeah, sure enough, I started rapping that way and just like fell in love more and more with rap and hip hop. Just listened to people who I thought were authentic. And that's where I'm at now. Like I just really believe in, putting out any kind of music that's authentic to yourself.
Are you all totally self-taught on that side of things? Like, have you ever taken time to study? Like, have you had like a tutor, or are you totally self-taught on that side of things?
I would say pretty much self-taught. I did have some friends and some other people that I've rapped with along the way that have just helped me get better. I'm still trying to get better every day. I definitely watch a lot of interviews with rappers and just hear like how do they get better at the craft. And a lot of it's just practice, honestly, and doing things you're not comfortable with. So I definitely have people who, like when I started, I only rapped over lo-fi beats and that was pretty much it. And then I have people who are like, no, like you got to try different styles, boom bap. We're working on like a music video right now for MVHQ that's more of like a poppy dance track. So just trying different things, I would say, has been an awesome teacher.
That's really, really cool. So, I guess segueing perfectly from there, you have a very interesting story of how you broke into the NFT space. We've heard stories in the past of, certainly plenty of top shot folks or small bankroll folks. Yours was a little bit different though. So what was your first exposure to NFTs? And can you share kind of how you broke into the space?
Absolutely. So believe it or not, I first heard of NFTs in two sources. One was the article on Beeple selling an art piece for I think like $6 million or something crazy at the time. And then the second was the SNL skit they did about NFTs. It was like a rap song that they did. So it was like anyone who watched NFL or SNL could have figured out, what an NFT was and just look into it a little bit further. But I looked into NFTs, found myself on Rarible.com, which was like an earlier version of OpenSea that wasn't as good. It was literally just like Craigslist of NFTs. There was just like random projects here and there. I've always loved art, and I was just looking through these NFTs like, oh, these are all cool. Like this is all fun artwork. Not sure what to really do from there, but just remember looking and being like, eventually I want to find an NFT that I'm going to buy. So I was just kind of sat there scrolling through projects. And at the time, there was this guy, Mark the Habibi, who had this project, the Habibis, that were really popular at the time. And I remember being like, I really want a Habibi. Like, I think these will do well. I want to buy these. I want a Habibi. So I just kind of like had an idea pop into my mind one night. I saw that he was doing a live stream. And I was like, oh my God, I can like talk to this guy. How can I somehow finesse this into a Habibi? So in my mind, I was like, if I write a rap about Habibis with just no context and I say to him in the live stream, can I send you a Habibis rap? That he will love it and he will send me a Habibi. Sure enough, if you go to my SoundCloud, there is a Habibis rap. It's like 50 seconds long, but I just like together a little something, a little verse about the drop coming up. Sure enough, he was like, what the heck? Like, okay, like contact me. I'll send you a Habibis. So I still have it. I didn't end up selling it or anything from there, but that's just what got me started and realizing like, wow, in this NFT space where there's so few people doing this, you don't even have to be like a professional rapper or anything like that. And I can just like leverage this little fun skill I have because at the time, NFTs were all about just like little fun projects. It wasn't like the whole, it needs to be like $1 billion company in the future. So my goal was like, let me just make raps and get NFTs and then parlay that into more and more NFTs. And eventually I became a flipper and a trader and all that fun stuff. But it all started with just like, let me make raps, get NFTs.
But this wasn't an explicit deal either, right? Like, it's not like you went to him and you're like, hey, I can create some really good raps. Like, I'm going to create one for you. You're going to be able to use it, put it on social media, whatever. I just want a Habibi back, right? Like that's not the way that the deal went down, right? It was just you had this idea and you were willing to take this chance. And of course you wanted one, but like it wasn't explicit, right?
Oh yeah, no, not at all. It like all started from just a place of I think this might happen, but I'm willing to be wrong. And I have made like many raps that have just people are like, okay, cool, thanks, and then nothing. There were a few like rap contests that I entered and won, so I got some ETH from that. It was a project that did promise me NFTs in exchange for raps and then backed out. But yeah, there's like no verbal agreement when I started off. This was purely just like, can I make a rap for you? And I assume that there would be a little like artistic reciprocation.
Yeah. So in like an indirect way, this theme has kind of come up several times of the concept of people trying to break into the space, get a project with the team, like that, right? Where oftentimes like, the strategy that people take is, just offering services, offering to help a little bit, get a feel, get comfortable, that kind of a thing. So in your case, at least, like what was your mentality there? Like, were you fully comfortable with the outcome that you may be doing this? It may take you a bunch of time to write it. Yeah, you probably think it's fun, but you just may not get anything in return. Like, what would be your, not just your mentality, but your advice there for people who are maybe stuck on that to some extent and are like, I don't really want to do something unless it's pretty explicitly set up, that there's an explicit deal. What's your mentality there?
I think this is just a good mentality to have in general in life, and it's really helped me a lot lately. Like especially in my mid-20s, this is something that I had a hard time with when I was younger. But just trying not to have expectations going into something. I think you can try to have a desired outcome, and you can sort of in your mind envision like, here is something that requires activation energy. I'm willing to put in the activation energy and just be happy that I did something. So with all these projects that I was doing, like I was telling you earlier, like trying different styles of raps and just doing things I haven't done before really helps me grow as someone who makes music. So for me, it was just an opportunity to do something I've never done. And I was happy with the fact that I would just find these projects and make these small little stories. And just doing that, I was happy to be creating. If it didn't have a desired outcome, you just got to keep moving because, you know, it's unrealistic to have expectations with anything. So I was never fully expecting like it to work out. I'm so happy it did. If it didn't, I would still just be like, well, I'm glad I tried.
It's a funny line to toe there, right? Where like you had a pretty explicit thought in terms of what you were manifesting in the start, right? Which is I'm going to do this, and in my dream world, like he's going to come back and he's going to give me one, and we're going to be great. But yet also not have expectations, right? Which is like a very funny line to balance there when you're that thoughtful about it as well. So definitely something that I feel like we're all working on to some extent. It's a hard balance sometimes to toe that line. Oh, okay. So when you had heard about it originally and you were creating the rap, and what was the motive at that point? Was it just as simple as financially driven to start, where you saw the Beeple? You saw, some other opportunities, saw the BBs, of course, and you're like, this just seems like a real cool financial opportunity that happens to intersect with things I like anyway. Like, how are you perceiving it?
Sort of twofold. I definitely think like anyone in this space will tell you that there's just a lot of fun you can have in the space, and we're also like here to make money at the same time. It can for sure go hand in hand. So at the start, like I said, I've never sold the Habibi. It's just chilling, and I think it was like a custom one he gave to friends and family. So I would never sell that just because that seems like wrong to do so if someone gives you something as like a gift or as a friend. But yeah, I'd say more so it was just to get involved with the space, and I just thought it would be really cool. So in my mind, it wasn't financially that I wanted. I just wanted it as like a flex of, wow, like I made a rap good enough to earn this NFT that other people are paying money for. But that still opened the doors to me of like the whole world of NFTs, and from there allowed me to do research and just learn a lot about the space.
So what was that next step like for you, right? So like you saw topically like, oh, this seems cool, like cool community, whatever else. What was that next step for you at that point? Did you have like, were you immediately intrigued by like the technology side of things? Like what was that pathway like for you in your experience? What were the next steps you took to kind of get more involved, more immersed?
So moving away from the raps, I vividly remember the moment that I was like, okay, I need to start doing this just like every single day. This was still Rareable Day. There was a project called Block Bobs by E-Boys, and there was like 15 of them at the time. And this was like still very early on in the NFT days, not like CryptoPunk, Bored Ape early, but like still early, like maybe a couple months after Bored Apes. And I just found this project. It looked cool, had decent artwork. They had like 3 of them that they dropped before. And I noticed that they sold sort of decently, but they were like collections of 15. So every couple of days they would tweet out like, we're going to drop another Block Bob. So I remember just camping on my laptop. It was like $80, which was like so expensive for an NFT at the start. I was like, oh my God, like what if I lose, $80? And sure enough, camped out, really quickly clicked some buttons, got one of these Block Bobs, was super excited and was like, oh man, now I got to try to sell this thing. Bought it for like 0.05 ETH maybe, and sold it for like 0.5, which I think was like $1,000-ish at the time. So yeah, I basically flipped this NFT, made $1,000, told all my friends, no one believed me, and I was like, I can't believe you guys don't believe me or don't want to try this. Like this is literally free money. A few more times, there's a few more Block Bobs that week, and was just like, this is it. Like I finally found it, something that you can flip. I used to like sell sneakers and stuff back in high school. I worked at a sneaker store. So the fact that you could make a flip and not have to deal with the physical good and shipping and all that crap, it was just like mind blown. Holy crap, this is so much money I'm making with like zero effort. And at that point I was hooked, like it was game over.
Yeah. And so I think like along the way there, right? I mean, similar with shoes, but especially in NFT world, I know you've kind of formed a bit of an opinion on like, we've been through like some ups and downs. We all know that's the case. We find ourselves now April 27th, right? NFT market's a little bit soft these days, right? Crypto's bouncing up and down a little bit to some extent. I think we all confidently say we believe in the technology, we believe in the concept of the communities and the membership model and the fund and all the things that you said. But certainly some of what we encountered along the way and you did was like the WAGMI life as well, right? So what's your philosophy there? Because I know you've kind of shaped that's a little bit molded over time in terms of how you view WAGMI life and how you've kind of adapted to that. What's your opinion on WAGMI life and attacking and balance and how you perceive that?
Yeah, that's a great question. The WAGMI stuff all has to do with like being early. And I remember that used to be something that people would say on Twitter all the time, and they still say it. It's like, we're still so early. And like if you zoom out and just look at, the time frame of NFTs existing in the world and what's the world is going to look like hundreds of years from now, like, yeah, we're so early. But you still have to keep in mind, like, what is the window of earliness in order to make a profit? So the whole WAGMI thing was awesome when it was like gutter dogs and junkyard dogs, even the pre-gutter cat gang crap. Just these random projects that were popping up in the early NFT days. You could mint any project with ease. If you just knew how to mint from contract, you had a huge competitive edge on the field. If you knew how to be efficient in a gas war, you were pretty much guaranteed to walk away with money. So just recognizing when there's like a clear trading edge, I think you can for sure say that you're early. And that's one of my biggest things as a trader. If you know you have a clear edge or just information asymmetry where you know that you're performing better than like 90% of a field, you're for sure early, and you should do that as long as possible. I would say like a couple months after, maybe 8 or so months after I joined, the edge became a lot less clear. That's where I think the WAGMI thing sort of became a little bit of cope of like, no, we're still early. Like these bags will pump, I promise. But if you don't have the edge and there's just not that clear like symmetry of information so that you're sure you have an advantage, I would say that's where it's less WAGMI in my book.
I think the one thing that I'm also hearing in there too is it's also like a definition of edge to some extent, because when we talked the other day and hearing you today as well, right? Like the one thing I'm kind of hearing from you too is definition of edge. Maybe it's just evolved to this is just to be like really resounding, kind of like either an absolute F yes or a no, and that's it, right? Like yes, definitely a great opportunity. Let's attack it. Absolutely not. And it falls into that camp. Is that a fair characterization of how you approach it, where unless it's like a slam dunk opportunity, you just sit into like patient mode now?
Yeah, for sure. Particularly now. I think when I first started, it was easy to get a little bit gung-ho because it was just trading on a scale that I've never traded before. And especially with the NFTs, a lot of it kind of blurs together. I used to hold like huge portfolios of, 50 to 80 NFTs at a time. And I would just kind of like assume, okay, there's some seasonality with these bags, like art blocks might ebb and flow and those might be down, but my PFPs might be up. But now I pretty much just am all in or all out. So I'm sure people in MVHQ know, I will sell every single NFT except my MVHQ token. That's just always how it's been. And then when it's bullish again, okay, maybe I'll pick up like 3, 4, 5. But even still, I'm just waiting for like, where is the moment of edge? Where can I strike? When it's a lot less certain, I'm almost always going to sell.
I mean, it's worth talking about a little bit of subtext here too, that may be like a little bit taboo. But in your case, you also have a day job as well, right? Currently. Yeah. So like I feel like part of the context here too is like kind of the orientation of. I have a couple comments here. One is like the orientation of the person and like the need to be able to earn, right? To be able to make money, pay for life, all those kinds of things, right? Then maybe to some extent like puts excess pressure on someone and forces them to like press a little bit of a tighter edge that may exist otherwise, right? So there's kind of like number one, there's that principle. Number two is the principle also of like, with NFTs, like you also can't, you can't lever up very effectively there, right? Like you can certainly lever up in crypto or equities like pretty effectively, right? So that way when you find your little minuscule edge, you can really go for it, right? In NFTs, like it's kind of limited to some extent how much you can do that, right? At least easily and in a liquid fashion. So like, do you agree with that? Like, how do you think having like other streams of income reduces the pressure to be able to press edges and like that balance between NFTs versus crypto and that whole thing?
Yeah, I definitely think that having a day job allows me to step away sometimes and not worry too much about my day to day. But like even in a situation where I would be, independently wealthy and could just sit around and try to figure out ways of making more money without any pressure, I still think it's important to find that edge and operate in a system where you have an edge. And there's different types of traders, right? Like there's people who are super, super good at identifying those degen projects. I think that's something that I'm decently good at. Like Goblin Town, the Nagamigos, stuff like that. I feel like I can see them trending on Twitter pretty early. I can see like this is a weird collection, snipe some rares, get in there, make some money, get out. But like there's a difference between being someone who can do that, separate that from other degen projects, and then someone who just mints every degen project. So if your like track record is, well, I minted 30 degen projects, 28 of them went to zero, and 2 of them went 10x, did that 10x of those 2 projects make up for all of your losses? So I think just looking at like your trading as a whole and seeing, is it profitable? That's always important regardless of what your bankroll is, right? Because if you're just kind of like messing around and throwing money without any real system, like you could get lucky. You ideally want to do something that's scalable.
I mean, if that's the case also, like, and you're essentially like minting every degen project that's out there, right? Like, wouldn't in theory you'd be better off at that point just like putting your money in an index, like some equivalent index, which basically represents the same thing anyway, and it's a lot more liquid and easier to deal with at that point. So I don't know, just a half thought there. But one other comment that I know is on your mind that you and I have talked about too is like where the next 10x or 100x in theory can come from, and I think you have like a bit of a wider lens on where that can come from, not just necessarily anchored to NFTs, but having your head on a swivel to like the adjacent categories. So like, where is your head on that currently, let's say, right? Like, are you explicitly focused in NFTs? Do you have your head on a little bit of a swivel? Like, how do you spend your time and your focus on scanning for the next big thing?
Yeah, great question. I would say the biggest thing is just being tapped into alpha. And I've talked to Mitch about this a little bit when I've seen him in person. I'm not sure what the state of NFTs are going to be. Like they're very regulated, they're not very regulated in the US right now. I know in Europe they're starting to pass some regulation. But when we first started, people were like, oh, it's just JPEGs. Then that evolved into like, these are the next multi-billion-dollar corporations and we're getting in on the ground floor. Now it's like, they're just pictures again, and they could all be the same picture. People are just wash trading. So I think the big thing is like technology is always evolving, and that is where the biggest 10x, 100x potential will come from. Because before there were NFTs, a bunch of people made money in DeFi summer. I was not one of those people, but I see the exact parallel of like, if you were just early to DeFi summer, there was a plethora of shitcoins you could have gotten into, and it didn't really matter if you knew what was popping off or not. You just kind of had to be there. When I first got into the NFT space, there was like a solid 3 or 4 months where it didn't even matter what the project was. It could have literally been any art blocks project, any drop, any mint. If you were there, you're probably going to make money. And I would say right now with the NFT space, I don't think it's going to be able to go back to that point. There will be mini bull markets like here and there where everything's pumping all at once. But I think that's different from just something so new. By you just being there and understanding how to use it, you're like guaranteed to make money. So that's what I look for. That's why I'm in MVHQ. I'm in a couple of other alpha groups where I'm just looking for like brand new stuff that people maybe haven't poked around in yet. And I like hats off to our members who are just so diligent about that. We have field reports all the time where people go in and just post these like really obscure layer 2 tokens, different technologies that are coming out. And I think just poking in them and putting in a little bit of like effort to research these new technologies, that's how you catch the next like 10x, 100x. Because you find something that's really small and new, and then you're there before it gets huge. Like, oh my gosh, all you have to do is just be there and have a little bit of money in, and boom.
With that in mind, and not to put you on the spot, but do you have something in mind in terms of where that may come from? Like, is this, for instance, with shitcoins and with crypto in general, right? There's been several waves, and like every cycle, every wave or mini wave, there are new ones that crop up and wind up being having huge returns, right? So it's possible that it could be within certainly NFTs or another category within NFTs. I mean, is your head there? Is your head in like in AI, for instance, which is a thing right now? Like, I don't know. Do you have any initial thoughts in terms of where do you think this is going to come from?
I don't have an exact thought of where it's going to come from. I love that you brought up AI because I do think that that is just like almost a no-brainer of just something to look into and understand how to use it now. I think knowing how to leverage AI, worst case scenario, you have a really solid skill set that's going to be like exponentially valuable in the future. One of my friends made the comparison of AI in its current state to the first generation iPhone. Like when the first iPhone came out, it was cool. It was a leg up over phones that were already out there. But like it slowly just morphed into this hugely influential thing in society and everyday life. And if you invested in, some of these phone providers or technology stocks that just dealt with smartphones, you could have maybe said electric vehicles like 10 years ago. These things that sort of paradigm shift technology tend to perform really well over like a 5 to 10 year time frame. So AI for sure. I definitely have been buying a lot of AI stocks and index funds that I'm just planning on like not touching for 20 years because I think the growth that you're going to see in AI is like exponentially fast. But in terms of like crypto, NFTs, etc., haven't found it yet. I'm just sitting and waiting. And I would say the biggest thing is just surround yourself with smart people. Use the resources that are available. Obviously, VC is awesome, but a lot of VC is just like what projects are going on to the day to day. I would recommend like shift some attention over to the field reports tab. Like you have such smart members in here who are just giving you these like little pockets of info that other people aren't talking about. And I think that's where like the true alpha is, honestly.
VC, for those not familiar with MVHQ, is voice chat or voice channel. It's not venture capital, although that's good also. But definitely invited. If you're an outsider of MVHQ and you're listening, please come in and consider getting a token and checking it out. It's a very, very good space, like Ross is pointing out. The other comment with AI too, right, is as we look at this economy, and let's just say a handful of folks are still attached here to Web3, which of course we are. Right? I mean, we all believe that that's the case. There's also this current state of AI that exists that we're all familiar with as we're playing with GPT and a variety of other tools that's like super, super disjointed as well, right? So like imagine being the person as well who believes in the Web3 space and is the person who can create the workflows to unlock the value for people to stand up projects more efficiently and effectively utilizing AI in the future. So in the past, that was like generative art, right? But that's like a very disjointed workflow that has of art, and then you still have to stand up a site with smart contracts and everything. That's a very disjointed experience right now. So I'm just throwing an idea out there for somebody to be able to create that workflow to the extent that you're interested in the space. But there's still a lot of work to be done. People, brands, and places to be able to stand up that they want to stand up in the space. Speaking of that, Ross, so thus far in like a couple of years, we've kind of formed this like really weird underground Web3 economy. I don't say underground, but yeah, underground Web3 economy that's kind of formed, right? And a good example was in your case. You were describing how you created the rap for Habibis. You had a hope of what it would produce, and it did actually produce that. So there was this economy that was produced, right, where you traded your rap or your services for this NFT in this case, right? How do you see that Web3 economy currently that's being formed and kind of how it's changing? Like, given the fact that we already know that freelance economy is a big thing, right? And then we also have this like Web3 economy that exists. Where do you think we're at there with the scheme of like people, meeting projects, trying to join teams? Where is that all going in your opinion?
So in my opinion, I think there's sort of like two types of builders in the space. People who are building for a very short term, I'm not trying to say cash grab, but they're not really thinking too far ahead. And then there's people who are building infrastructure. So I love investing and looking at people who are building infrastructure because I think that is where the money's at. Like trends come and go, right? And you can see that not just in NFT space, you can see that in fashion, you can see that in music, you see that in like little pockets that pop up here and there. Like I know in the stock market, there was so many metaverse companies that were huge like a year ago just because of the NFT and using NFTs as buzzwords. They didn't actually build anything. So you'll see a lot of people from a freelance perspective who come in and it's like, okay, like I'm going to get involved in these projects. And maybe it was a famous painter who's like, I'm going to make a project, and people buy into it because they're like, oh, he's a famous painter. Like I need to have his NFT project. And those do well for what, a week, 2 weeks tops. And then they start to fade away unless it's like a super duper famous person and their artwork just holds itself like X copy or maybe Damien Hirst the currencies. Then you have people who are just trying to build infrastructure and stuff that's going to last. So if you're looking for the types of freelance work that's out there, I would try to get involved in something that you're going to build and grow over time. Obviously, plug the MVHQ, not just here to plug MVHQ, but like genuinely, we're trying to build a community and just seeing the growth of like how our members have found different ways to leverage alpha and also just build up the own community to get involved in other sources of revenue that we didn't start the community with. That's what you want. You want founders who are going to adapt and grow and always stay at the forefront, as opposed to just saying like, we're here to make a launch. We're going to create this project, and then that's it. We're done. Like, we made the launch, we created a brand, and now we're just going to sit back. Like, those things go to zero because you're not innovating anymore.
I think you're going to have a line, by the way, after this episode, and people listening and recorded for like app resumes or something that people can create, so they can like have a creative way to break into a company and share their background. Maybe there's a side hustle or something for you there, which would be pretty cool. With what you're talking about, with not the infrastructure but the project side of things, right? So we've seen this theme, like you're pointing out time and time again, right? Where projects, maybe there's something interesting and they only last a week or a couple weeks, or maybe it's a worse version of that and it's an explicit rug, or maybe it's even like a better version, more importantly, which is they have good intentions and they create a roadmap, but it still kind of just like fades and it lacks continuity. Like, what do you think is going on there? Like why is this such a problem for, again, throw out the explicit rug projects. That's intentional, right? So totally toss those out. For the projects that genuinely have good intent, that have a really, good roadmap in mind that they think is like, what's going on there? Why projects are having trouble keeping people really sticky throughout ups and downs and the full pathway and otherwise? Like, what do you think is the real problem there that exists? Of course, notwithstanding like the current macro conditions, which is a thing. But if there's like a really cool brand that's fun and engaging, and the people also like it, it's not just for like investment purposes, that people also genuinely like it and they like why has that been such a problem over the past couple of years, would you say?
Okay, so this is going to be like a semi-pretentious answer, but I mean it with all sincerity. I think it's just people having short attention spans. I think it's brands that don't know how to continue to innovate and excite. And I think the perfect example for this is the brand Supreme. For those who are listening, don't know about the brand Supreme, I'm shocked. I'm sure you've heard of it. But if you haven't, the concept behind Supreme is that it was started out as this like underground skateboard brand, and their clothes was very hard to get. A lot of rappers wore it. A lot of famous people wore their shirts. And it was just like instantly recognizable. From an art perspective, fashion perspective, it's nothing crazy. They take a common piece of clothing and they slap a red logo on it that says Supreme. Inherently, just a red Supreme logo doesn't mean anything, right? Like, we don't need it. There's no reason you'd be paying more for that than something else, but it became exciting and it became a status symbol and it became hard to get. People went crazy for it. And like Supreme shirts back in the day, they maybe sold for like $60, $80 retail. People were paying up to like $600, $700 for these shirts because it was so hard to get. Now, fast forward, where's Supreme at now? It's like not that hard to get. They're just churning out clothes every single week after week. They up their production numbers because they're cash grabbing to an extent. They're like, everyone wants Supreme, so everyone's going to get Supreme. What happens when everyone gets Supreme? It's super readily accessible. It loses that mystique. It like loses that awe, and it's no longer that shiny, hard to obtain object because everyone has it. So people are like, if everyone has it, it's not that special. On to the next thing. Obviously, here's that parallel to NFTs, right? These projects that started off, I think Bored Ape's a good example. They're obviously still going great. I think Bored Ape has great IP, so no shade to Bored Ape or Bored Ape holders. But it started out, wow, this is like, you're part of this elite yacht club and there's only 10,000 and it's hard to get in the community. And then, okay, now everyone has a dog. Now everyone has a mutant. Now everyone has land plots. Now everyone has bots. Like, if they just keep churning out more and more and more and more and more like Bored Ape stuff to the point where everyone who ever thought of maybe having a Bored Ape has a Bored Ape, no one's going to want it anymore. So that's like the issue in my mind in the space is like, you can get people to buy a shiny object once. You can be like, this is so different and so cool and we're Goblin Town and we're such a weird project. But if you don't do anything beyond that to capture people's attention and still kind of like instill that value of exclusivity, then people are going to move their attention span to whatever the new and exciting thing is. Because like, as people, we just want stuff that's new and exciting. And that's why, like, moving forward, if you want to invest in something that's going to stand the test of time, it needs to bring value, right? It can't just be that exciting feeling, that roller coaster ride of like, oh my gosh, like I got the new shoes, I got the new shirt. You need something that, okay, it's going to provide you a service over time where you're constantly getting actual value from it.
So what intersects with that to some extent, it's really great, Ross. And what intersects with that to some extent, of course, is like the economic model as well, right? So the economic model previously was these project owners, right, from their vantage point was I mint this out, generate a bunch of capital, right? Some of that we get, some of it we reinvest, right? We have a team, you get the point. And then we also be able to rely on these royalties, which no longer exist, at least temporarily. We know that's the case. But even if they do exist, oftentimes 2%, 5%, nominally sustainable. And oh yeah, by the way, if you're doing your job well and people genuinely like the product, they shouldn't be selling it in theory, right? Because you're actually creating something exciting. So I guess with that all in mind, like, what if you're a project owner, like what comes next? Like, is the only real pathway to keep your collections under a certain brand tight, like you're suggesting, so there's scarcity and there's always intrigue and development, and then if you want to build on top of it for economic, financial reasons, you build a totally separate brand as a result of that that's not connected to the first brand? Like, what's the, like, how should they approach that in theory, knowing that there is kind of like the profit motive in mind, and also making sure it's manageable? Like, do you have any thoughts about that?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing coming into it is like what we talked about at the beginning of our conversation with having expectations, right? And like everyone's always said this in the space, like you want brands that are going to under promise and over deliver as opposed to the other way around. But if you're an NFT or Web3 brand, you want to give your holders a reason to hold. And if you're not doing anything, there's never going to be a reason to hold. So I don't know if that's marketing, and marketing could play a large part of it. If you're an NFT project, memes on Twitter have done a lot of projects really well because they're just captivating other people and wanting them to hold it. More people you can have interested in your project who can't get access to it, that incentivizes people to hold because they're like, everyone wants this. Why would I let go? So I think you always have to figure out ways that you can like increase your brand's value via services are great. I think that's really hard to do though, unless you create like a legit company. And I'm still waiting for an NFT project to do it. I know there's been some that sort of do like a ticket NFT where they gave their holders tickets to sporting events. And I think that's awesome. I don't really know how that works from a revenue perspective and how long they can keep that up before they run out of funds. Unless you can deliver like a value constantly to your holders over and over through time, I think you just have to find a way to keep your brand's image fun and exciting, be it community events, just marketing, trying to be out there and different. I wish there was a better answer for you, but genuinely, like,
it's tough.
Oh, go ahead.
No, it's tough. No. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just tough. And I don't think any projects have really cracked the code yet. I think the ones that are staying around the longest, back to Bored Apes, they're just kind of Ponzi schemes, to be honest. Like, again, no shade. They're great at coming up with Ponzis. It's awesome in my mind that they were able to create, like, games that you would play, and then there's a round 2, like you got to play the game more. There's like 3 NFTs that come out and you're going to want all of them. Like they're so good at creating that hype, and the marketing and the storytelling is all really good to get people amped. But yeah, unless you're like an elaborate Ponzi nomics NFT at this point, there aren't a lot of incentives to hold stuff.
I mean, you think about asset classes outside of NFTs, right, that are where the assets are worth a ton, but people still hold them. I mean, start to think about things like really, high-end cars, maybe high-end watches, art, certainly, right? Things like that. But the dynamic that's also a little bit different, and I don't want to overgeneralize here, so I'm not overgeneralizing towards anyone specific, but not to overgeneralize here. Oftentimes, the people who then hold those things, right, the cars that we're talking about, the watches we're talking about, the art we're talking about, have a bunch of money, right? So they don't really care that the thing is, is worth a few $100,000 in value or whatever. They care more about having the prestige and the asset value. Maybe some memberships as well would fall into this category as well, like a Soho House or something in that direction. That's the context that exists. So I mean, I guess does that suggest to me that, like, based on what you're saying, scarcity, right? But you also need the right people to buy into the scarcity, be it Justin Bieber or whoever it is. And then it also on top of it needs to have what you're saying, which is continuity, right? Where they're constantly refreshing the brand, and it's always like the freshest status symbol. It stands the test of time. It evolves really well. It seems like it's that combination maybe that makes it more sustainable.
Absolutely, yeah. And like with those brands that you're talking about, a big part of it is just collectors with deep pockets. One of my like biggest green lights that I look for in an NFT project is, are people buying rares? If people aren't buying the rares, there's probably not like a whole lot of collection going on. It's probably more just I'm speculating and thinking the floor is going to go up. Remember when Nakamigos was at like 0.13 ETH? I saw people buying some of the rare ones in the collection for like 1 ETH, 2 ETH, et cetera, et cetera. When you have those like big buys of the stuff that's rare and truly rare in the collection, that to me is such a good sign, because it's like there's someone here who's actually trying to collect this. And obviously they could still just be working on a bigger wallet scale and flipping in the future. But you really do need those collections and collectors. Like Rolex is the perfect example because they hold value so well over time because there's just so many people who want them and do collect them. If you made a one-of-one watch on your own and it was like Aslow's watches, there would be fewer in the world than Rolexes, but that doesn't automatically provide value to it. You would need a community of people who are like, I want Aslow's watches. I'm never going to sell mine. This is like priceless to me. And then suddenly more and more people are going to come in and be like, well, I want one too. But if you look at those brands, Rolex being the perfect example, they still market awesome. You know, they have that synonymous status with like wealth and opulence, and it's sexy to wear them. So I don't know if they're like a better watch than others. I'm sure they're not. I'm sure there's a ton of watches that do a better job at keeping time than Rolexes, but like they just have that collector status. So people are always going to come back to it.
I think you're shedding light on like a really important thing here, right? Because as you start to look at the components that exist in an NFT project, right? It's you know, like what utility you directly get is that you get to pull tokens out of it. It's you get access, you get tickets, you get merch. You know, community even is certainly a thing as well, right? Like by far and away, if you're trying to pinpoint an asset that's going to be worth a ton, right? Like far and away, the only thing that really matters at the end of the day is the status symbol and what it stands for from a brand standpoint. Then it's a status symbol. That's like, you know, for any high end asset, that's got to be like 95% of the value that exists probably within the space and probably beyond it, if you had to say, right? And then, you know, I guess maybe the only thing that would be close second to that would be to have the ability to produce more financial value, which would be like an alpha group or something like that. But almost everything else, tickets, access, it's all like very distant in the scheme of like the value that it would produce and why it would have a really high price at the end of the day. So I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense and is really landing for me. And the importance of brand and making a brand that's not just timeless, but it refreshes as well. And kind of always staying on top of being current and being relevant. So that's very, very cool. Another category, Ross, you have to hit on while you're on here today is the art and music side of things. I'm curious where your head is at as it relates to art and music NFTs. Like, do you think that's something we've all heard about it, and many of us are less involved in the art and music scene. So maybe art a little bit more since there were so many art NFTs, but music a lot less, right? Where's your head at as it relates to music NFTs? Is that something that's impending? Are we going to see royalties integrated for up and coming artists more like we've talked about? Is Spotify going to be disrupted anytime soon? Like, where do you think that's all going?
There's three things I'm permanently bearish on in the long term. It is photography NFTs, movie NFTs, and music NFTs in that order. It's a shocker. You might be surprised to hear me like bad talking music NFTs, but I just don't really see it happening. You know, I think the few use cases where it could really, really come into play is if it was a hugely successful and already famous musician who decided I'm only going to release this artwork or album as an NFT, and all it would do differently is allow them to retain all the rights to their own music, which is something I'm all about. And same thing for photography and movies. You know, if you can maintain all of the profits for that, that's awesome. But it still relates to having to build a brand around that, right? Like if you're a great musician, a lot of the stuff you're getting from a label or for a brand is that distribution. A lot of it is them helping you set up these tours and having the connections to venues so that you can perform and sell merch and all the stuff that comes along with it. When you see these little collections that have come out, like we made a rap about Bored Apes, that's awesome and that's really cool. Those projects are so short-lived because it's like, what are they doing beyond just putting music out there, right? If you're the consumer, you're not really getting any benefit from it being in an NFT form. Like you can just still stream it for free and not buy the track. So why would you buy it? I'm only seeing this in a case of like, if you are Jay-Z and you made an album and there was only one copy of the album in the world and you kept it gated beyond something where you needed the NFT itself to listen to the album, that would go to for a lot of money and that'd be an interesting experience. And then, maybe you lease out the songs to a venue and they have access to the NFT for 24 hours or something. But yeah, I mean, other than having the rights and being like, I own the masters to these tracks, you can do that now without an NFT. You can just like have a rights in a contract. So I really don't think that's going to blow up. And I am so anti-photography NFT. It's so crazy. That's just my hot take. No shame if there's people who take photographs in here. Photography is awesome, but like, come on, how is your photography project special?
Interesting. Yeah. So can we just push a little bit more on the music side of things? Because there's two specific use cases that I have in mind. I totally get what you're saying. Two specific use cases though that I have in mind, building on what you're saying, that I think are particularly interesting. One is the really established artist, right? Who a brand that's bigger probably than even the music company that's representing them at some point, right? So take your Jay-Z example, or whatever you want to pick. They don't need the partner anymore, right? They already know all the venues. They could just call them, right? Like, as long as they have somebody managing it or have a team managing it, they could bring it in-house, arguably, right? So that's one end of the spectrum where they break off in theory and do their own thing, contracts notwithstanding, and own 100% of the kind of IP and the revenue and all that side of things. But then also the other end of the spectrum as well, Vision being like a brand new artist that's trying to catalyze, and much like many NFT projects, trying to build your initial community and get people to buy into it. And I'm wondering on that side also if like incentive system and the kind of like distribution based model, securities notwithstanding, but the distribution model where the holders, the believers, the initial Kickstarters, right, Kickstarter investors, to get generate portions of the revenue or the royalties in annuity, perpetuity, whatever else it is. What about those two use cases? Like where you're a brand new artist trying to catalyze yourself, or you're an artist that literally doesn't need all of that nice support around you because you're so big that you don't even need it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a new artist, you could do something creative where you're saying like, okay, if you own this NFT, you'll get the rights to this song forever. And any revenue that I generate from having this, you'll get a fraction of it depending on how much of the. So let's say you dropped a track and you made it into 10 NFTs, right? So if you own this, you'll get 10% of royalties of my song moving forward. Maybe that would incentivize some of the buyers who bought it to say, okay, now I'm going to be a brand ambassador for this rapper because I want them to be huge. And then 5 years down the line, I'm going to get 10% off their hugely successful hit that I bought. And I have a great ear for music, so I'm here early. That could work. But it's just like, if you did have that hugely successful hit that people heard so early that they're willing to pay money for an unknown musician, probably would have been a good enough song to make it through more conventional means. And music and art, it's all so subjective, and so like there's so many factors that go into making someone famous and successful that's where I think the big roadblock is for those NFTs. The people who are willing and able to convert music into NFTs have probably already made it, and the rest of them are probably just capturing a fad. And there have been music projects that did decently well for like a week, but they never do well long term because like they're just not big musicians,
Yeah, that makes sense. So you think there's a little bit of a weeding out, it sounds like, that takes place, and they probably would be making it under normal system and circumstance. So I can get my head around that, unless it's like very, very underground. But what about the other side though of the spectrum? So like a Jay-Z example, right, where Jay-Z's big enough, can call the venues directly, can have his own management team in theory if he wants to. I mean, is there an obstacle that exists there? Contracts notwithstanding, is there an obstacle that exists there as to why they couldn't break off and just do it themselves and form their own community and control 100%? Or is just distribution and economics so much better with like the existing infrastructure that like they would just never do it because it's just a terrible idea? Or is it just too risky?
Just think like if you get to that scale, it's probably more profitable to go a conventional route, right? Because like Jay-Z example, what are you going to stand to gain other than one buyer who's like, okay, I'm going to give you $10 million for this album and no one else is going to have it? Because the idea with NFTs is you're going to be making money off of the royalties from people buying it multiple times. But why would someone buy it if they can still listen to the track? So all of these song NFTs that you can look at an OpenSea, you can listen to the whole song without buying it. But now by doing that, you're not getting the revenue from Spotify. You're not getting the revenue from YouTube. To your point, if you're Jay-Z, sure, throw yourself a concert, sell a ton of merchandise, and like make a bunch of money. Like so many musicians just make a crap ton of money off of merchandise and concerts, like more so from the streams themselves. But if I'm a big famous musician, unless I'm doing the calculations and thinking, I know that I could find buyers who are going to pay like crazy for this NFT, more so than I would get from just a traditional streaming platform where they might get a billion streams. And I would never do that. I would consider doing both. Like, I think Snoop Dogg did it really well, right? Like, he made a song or two and said, okay, you can buy like 10,000 of these, and just sat back and collected $3 million because people were like, it's Snoop, like, it's going to sell well. But that was more so preying on consumer behavior. It gave zero value to the end holder, and that's the ultimate pitfall of the music NFTs, and why I don't think it's going to be successful is because, like, you just owning a portion of a song doesn't do anything for you. And most of the time, the music NFTs that we've seen, you don't own anything. You're just basically paying for a free song and, like, holding someone's bag.
Which was the track that didn't Rihanna release one track recently and fractionalize it, if I'm not mistaken? If anybody knows which track that was, I'd love to know. But I'm pretty sure she released one, and I think it was royalty driven, such that. But then there's the question of like technology and how you connect that, right? Such that every time it plays, you get distribution of X, and it gets split. And I don't know. There's something there, but I totally hear what you're saying as well. Is part of the challenge that exists here too, Ross, that like music specifically is such like a pretty well-oiled model, right, in the scheme of like the different ways that's monetized, and the fact that you need connections into the venues and all the and promotion. Is that why music is so challenging in your opinion, versus maybe there's some other examples? I don't know, maybe streaming's a better example since there's not concerts and that revenue side of things. Is there any other example that's like still has kind of like, you know, creative work and production that's suited a little bit better for NFTs in your opinion, or do you kind of lump them all into a similar bucket currently where there's still some challenges that exist?
I think NFTs are probably like really tailored right now to visual art. I think there's ways that it might expand in the future where like you genuinely do have the thesis of it gives early access to ownership of a project or a company from the ground floor. And I love that thesis of if we make an NFT and only 10,000 people can own it, I basically own 1/10,000th of that company. We haven't seen enough brands come out and make companies with good business plans and are structured to do well in the long term and have that runway that a traditional company that's getting VC funding and then IPOing is seeing. I love the artistic visual art is great. Like blocks in theory, it's awesome, right? If you really believe in those artists and you think, hey, these are the new Van Goghs of 2023 and 100 years from now, they're going to be worth thousands of dollars. Sure, you want that verified piece of art on chain and you can get that notoriety and prove it's verified and authenticated all in one place. And it's a digital asset, so you don't have to worry about the fakes or shipping physical goods. Like, that's amazing. But in terms of like, is there an edge for NFTs for music or film? Not really, just because those are just really hard industries to get into. And I don't think the fact that it's on NFTs makes it any easier. If anything, it makes it harder because there's fewer people who are in this space. You know, I think if you're trying to break out as a musician, your best bet is probably to just really get good at marketing and find ways to get as many views and as listens as possible. Like that's why you see so many musicians going to TikTok now, because it's just like really easy way for you to get views without having to put a ton of money into it.
That makes sense. I'm curious to know why you're also so anti-photography specifically. Do you mind sharing a thought about photography specifically? Is it that it's just more of a commodity and, you know, art tends to have more one-of-ones and therefore it tends to stand out a little bit more? Or what's your thought there?
It's just like, this is just such a personal pet peeve. So I'm kind of laughing because like there's no real reason for me to hate on it so much. But I've never made money off a photography project. I think there's certainly people out there who have. But in general, what's so cool about the NFTs a lot of the time is the rarity and the AI or computer generation of it all, right? Like it's cool when you have limited rarity and traits for a certain collection. And it's something that's just like so exclusively digital media that you're not seeing elsewhere. Like you're not going to see the type of art that you're going to see in an NFT in a museum, at least not yet. Like I'm sure you might now. But for photography, if every piece in the collection is a one-of-one and, you know, it just dilutes the rarity of the entire collection. And that's usually what I've seen with these photography projects. They're put out like 400 photos. They're all basically the same. If they are the same photo, why would anyone buy it? And I can excuse the whole, like, there's the meme in the NFT stuff, like I screenshotted it or, oh, I saved it, like I own this JPEG. That's kind of how I feel about like photography NFTs. If it's literally just a photograph of something, there's no brand associated with it. It's just a picture of your vans over a building. What is your real benefit of owning it here, right? Like you just want something from a famous photographer, that's fine. But if it's just a no-name photographer, like why would I ever care about it?
It's super funny, man. I mean, I guess it does link to the photographer artist in this case, like you're talking about. Definitely funny, funny irony though, given how we generally believe in the space and how it applies to photography here. Very, very cool. So, I think this was just an absolutely awesome conversation, and it was really cool to hear your opinions. And I think what I really appreciate most about this conversation is you were very, very open, even if the opinion was a little bit taboo or not necessarily what people want to hear in some cases. So I really enjoyed the conversation, Ross, and appreciated your freestyling as well earlier. That was also really awesome. So thanks so much, man, for coming on and for being so open with your thoughts and how you evolved. It's really cool to hear that story. For everyone listening live, I really appreciate you as well, like always. And if you're listening recorded, so much appreciated the support. Second shout out as well, if you're listening recorded, to check out the aforementioned VC, which is the VC, the voice channel, and MVHQ. It might be of interest to you, but much everyone. We'll see you similar time next week. Thanks, everyone.
Much, Azza. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ross.